remind members that this is a virtual meeting and is being live webcast. And the virtual meetings protocol that is being circulated to all members will underpin how this meeting is to be conducted. I will say up front, as I did last week, when we get to questions, if you want to ask a question, just type question into the conversation box. When we get to debate, just write debate in there as well. So apart from that, the conversation box is not to be used, please. Mr. White, apologies for absence, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We've got one apology for this morning's meeting from Councillor Coulson. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Item 2, declarations of interest. I invite members to declare any personal or disclosable pecuniary interest. Any declarations will need to state if the interest is personal or a disposable pecuniary and the nature of the interest. If you have an interest, if you could just type into the box interest, I'll then ask. If there's no response, then I'll move on to item 3. So it's communications and business brought forward by myself. Then as you have no communications or business brought forward today. Item 4, committee minutes. So it's the DNML committee meeting for the 4th of February 2020, and I'll ask Councillor Yellen to present the minutes, please. Councillor Yellen?
Yes, sorry, Mr. Mayor, I was just getting the right page. I move that the minutes of the meeting of the Development Management and Licensing Committee held on 4th of February 2020 be received and noted. They are DM and L 29 to DM and L 34 and can be found between pages 1 and 3. Could I have a seconder, please?
Happy to second, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. For this one, it's to note by exception. So if there's anybody who has any issues with these minutes, please speak now. If not, we'll go on to the next set. Which should be complete. My apologies, paper everywhere. So it's item 4(2), council tax setting panel. You lose paper so quickly. I'd like to ask the council to agree the minutes of the council tax setting panel meeting held on the 21st of February 2020. And if I can have a seconder, please.
I'm happy to second those, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Again, in the same vein as the last one, if we don't have, if it's by exception, if everybody's happy with those minutes. Anyone who isn't, please state so. Thank you. Are we okay with that, Mr. White? You don't want
Absolutely fine. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Those are both noted. Thank you very much.
Yeah, typically the one piece of paper I needed, I couldn't actually find. Right, item 5. 2020-21 Capital Strategy, 2021 Treasury Management Strategy, and 2020-21 Investment Strategy. Can I ask Councillor Edmonds to introduce the report, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. These 3 strategies outlined in this report are required to be presented annually to Council for approval. They set out the Council's capital and borrowing limits and where the Council will invest its money on an annual basis. The strategies were due to be presented to both the Audit Committee and Council on the 24th of March, but these meetings were cancelled due to COVID-19. Therefore, these strategies are being presented to members at this meeting for approval. Members will recall that the Treasury Management training for members was arranged for the 4th of March, where the key points of the annual strategies were discussed. The capital strategy sets out projected capital plans and the capital financing requirement, which is the measure of the Council's underlying need to borrow for the capital programme, which is a maximum of 32.8 million for 2020-21. Within the limits and estimates set out in the strategy, there is headroom for community housing and renewable energy projects. All of the Council's projects within the 2021 capital programme will be reviewed in light of the financial challenges that councils face due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Reports will be brought to members detailing the outcome of the reviews. The strategies are based on the 2020-21 capital programme approved by Council in February 2020 and can be revised by Council at any point during the financial year. 5.3 of the capital strategy confirms that the Council is currently undertaking due diligence work on the opportunity for the Council to purchase shares in a special purpose vehicle so as to own, operate or invest in renewable energy generation. The results of this work will be reported to the Invest to Earn Committee in due course. The Council is proposing to continue to invest its money in banks and building societies within the UK, which is set out in the Treasury Management Strategy. With the recent reduction of the Bank of England base rate to an all-time low of 0.1% on the 19th of March, the Council is unlikely to achieve its Treasury Management investment income budget of £105,000 in 2021. And this will be included in the next budget monitoring report. And may I just reiterate that these strategies are based on the capital programme agreed by Council in February 20. Clearly, there will be a need to review these in the light of the COVID emergency, and members will be kept fully informed as the situation develops. Finally, Mr. Mayor, there are 2 recommendations. The first is for Council scrutiny and approval of the 3 strategies. The second, that delegated authority be given to the Section 151 officer in consultation with the Leader of the Council and the lead Hub Committee member for Finance to make minor amendments to these strategies if required throughout the 2021 financial year. Thank you.
Thank you.
There are questions, Mr. Mayor, from Councillor Davies.
Yes, thank you. Councillor Davies.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just 2 very quick questions. In recommendation 2, where it refers to the Section 151 officer in consultation with the Leader of the Council and the Hub member for Finance, having sort of delegated authority. In the absence of current audit meetings and ONS meetings, how will we as members be updated as to any amendments that have been made? That's my first question. And the second question is quite simple. It's regarding the executive summary, 1.3, when it talks about Treasury management strategy. Councillor Edmonds just touched upon this, about the reduced base rate and how that's going to affect our budget. And Councillor Edmonds mentioned it will be the revised figures will be given to us in the next budget report. I just wondered when the next budget report will be coming out. So that's my two questions.
Councillor Edmonds.
I think it's probably best if I refer those to Mrs. Buckle. If I think Mrs. Buckle has joined us.
Yes.
Would
yes.
you like to expand on those?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Councillor Edmonds. Yes, with regards to our Treasury management income, members will be aware that the base rate is now at an all-time low of 0.1%. Our budgeted Treasury management income is 105,000. With the base rate being so low, the main places that we invest are money market funds and banks and building societies within the UK. So yes, we would be envisaging that possibly 80 or 90% of that 105,000 is going to be impacted if base rates continue to be as low as they are. With regards to the question of when will the next budget monitoring report will be, I think the main thing we need to do is some very frequent budget monitoring reports. We will know very shortly what our performance against our income targets is for April. We will be looking to bring the first budget monitoring report to members, I would say around about late May, early June, and that will be based on the budget monitoring results for the month of April. Normally we do quarterly budget monitoring reports to members every 3 months. I think because of the situation we are in, we will be looking to do those much more regularly and on a monthly basis. We do have a meeting of the Financial Stability Review Group in the diaries for the 12th of May, and obviously the budget monitoring position will be one of the items on the agenda, and there will be other things we need to look at, such as looking at the medium-term financial strategy as well at a much earlier stage in the financial year.
Thank you. Councillor Jerry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just in response to Councillor Davies' first question, we are starting, I think, to move back to trying to get business as normal as we can. The past month has been punctuated by daily meetings with the leaders of this council and South Hams and the SLT. Those are now been discontinued, and we're reverting back to having a regular weekly meeting with the deputy leader of the Conservative group and the opposition group, with the chief exec within West Devon. But also we have had some very successful, I think, full council briefings on a Tuesday. We've not got one today because we've got a council meeting, but I am intending to continue with those on a weekly basis so that we can update members as to developments and things like that that may have happened and decisions that may have been taken. And I hope that will meet with everyone's approval.
Thank you. Any other questions? Nothing coming up on the screen. So can I ask Councillor Edmonds to recommend a proposal in a second, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move the recommendations on page 9 of the agenda papers.
Do you have a seconder?
I'm happy to second that, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. So we could. Yes.
Mr. Mayor, it's Councillor Ridges here. I've just put a note about. I don't know if this is the right time for debate or maybe missed a question. I know there's a report coming later that we are looking at emergency funding for fusion. And I noticed on 2.6 of this report that Fusion, we are due a rebate from Fusion, and that's a question. That is a question I'd like. I'm sorry I missed the first point. And the second point is, I know this is a report on the process rather, but what is the latest on our lease arrangements that we have on, particularly referring to the Bristol commercial property investment? And is that material as a question forming part of this debate to this to the recommendations put forward?
Thank you. I will ask Councillor Edmonds to answer the second bit. I need to just check that your first statement, I think it's in part 2, which is item 13. I might be wrong, but I'd like to ask Mrs. Bowen if that can be discussed now.
Mr. Mayor, I would suggest that issues to do with the emergency powers, as referred to, will be discussed in part 2 later on in the agenda.
Thank you. So, Councillor Edmonds, can you answer the second question, please?
Just to confirm, this is in relation to the Bristol property.
Yes, it is the Bristol property. In any, well, I suppose any of the commercial investments have any of our leaseholders come back to us on sort of reducing the rent, deferring their payments, etc.
I will ask Mrs. Buckle to confirm in a moment, but to the best of my knowledge, that has not happened in any of the commercial properties, with the exception of one of the units in Plymouth, where I think the tenant has approached the council with, I think, a request for a reduction in rent. But I would defer to Mrs. Buckle perhaps to just confirm that point.
That is correct, Mr. Mayor. And with regard to the Plymouth properties, that it's just been highlighted to us that there, yes, that there may be a request coming, but that request is something for the future, as opposed to there hasn't been any rental reduction to date. They're just flagging a concern that they may come to us in the future on that.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Okay, thank you. Now, I'll just go back to any more debate. So if there's no more debate, then we need to vote on this one. I believe we have agreed, Mr. White, that this one could be by exception.
If that's your wish, Mr. Mayor, that's absolutely fine.
Okay, if everybody's happy with that, I've certainly seen my screen if anybody's against this. So if it's anybody who is against this report, if you could just state it in the column. If you don't, then we'll say that this one's carried and goes forward to then item 6. Pay policy statement and pay and reward strategy 2020-21. Councillor Jerry, to introduce the report, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to introduce the report that is in front of everybody. This report sets out the Council's policy as required by the Localism Act 2011. It also takes into account the Hutton Report recommendations, which aim to measure pay dispersion throughout an organisation, and it does that by tracking the multiple of the head of paid service salary against the lowest paid employee and also the wider workforce. You'll note that the multiple between the head of paid services salary and the median salary within the organisation of 28,785 is a factor of 4.17. I'd also add that the pay settlement for 2020-21 is not yet agreed. the unions have asked for 10% and are lobbying government to support local authorities in making that payment. The employers have made a final offer of 2.75%, which was rejected within hours of it being made. So we're at a bit of an impasse at the moment, but that will be resolved in due course. But other than that, I'd like to recommend the adoption of the pay policy to you, and am happy to take any questions at this point.
No questions coming up. So could you please now take it forward to the recommendation with a proposer and a second, please. Councillor Jones.
Certainly, Mr. Mayor, I would like to move the recommendation, which is shown on page 67 of the agenda papers, items 1 and 2. Could I have a seconder, please?
I'm happy to second that, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. So we move into debate. Anybody want to debate? More silence. Thank you. Again, with this one, Mr. White, are we happy that we take this forward as we did the previous item?
With your approval, Mr. Mayor, in the absence of any debate and any showing members on the left-hand side that they wish to vote against this one, I think that we can do it again by exception with your approval, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. So that's what I'll say. If there's nothing coming up on my screen, we will take it that this has been accepted. Thank you. Item 7, pay and display review. Council appears to introduce the report, please.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor. I would like to propose the following motion, if I may, please. And that is that this item be deferred to a future council meeting for further consideration. As members will be aware, and yourself included, I've been working with officers and we prepared the report and everything to come forward to the March meeting, and that was postponed until now. And now is not the time, I feel, that we should be considering this, given that we are supporting our towns with free parking at the moment and the businesses within those towns. And I feel that very strongly that we should defer this for a future meeting. Do I have a seconder, please?
I'm happy to support that recommendation, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. So the motion put forward, again, if we could do this by exception, unless I have anyone else saying they would prefer a full vote on this. But if there's anybody against this motion, please say so. Thank you. Then we take it that this motion is carried. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Right, item 8, annual review of the council's constitution. Councillor Edmonds to introduce, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The council has a statutory duty to adopt its constitution annually and to review that document to ensure that it is fit for purpose and reflects both statutory requirements and the council's working practices. The Constitution is a living document, and this report summarises the changes made throughout the year and details the changes required to our working practices to enable the Council to respond effectively to the current health crisis. The proposed changes relate to emergency powers, sealing of documents, powers to appoint town and parish councils, and development management. I would just highlight paragraph 2.47 on page 100, referring to development management, and the proposed change in delegated authority is in respect of member and officer planning applications only. Full details of the changes are outlined in Appendix A. Moving on to the three recommendations on page 97 of the report, the first asks members to note the changes made during the year. The second, to agree and formally adopt the amendments to the Constitution as fully outlined at Appendix A. And finally, to adopt the Constitution for the forthcoming year with immediate effect. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Any questions? Councillor Davies, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I mean, I'm quite happy with what's been recommended, but in 2.41, when it talks about emergency powers, the head of paid service having the power to act immediately in any situation to protect the council, and this being now adding the deputy chief executive, which I'm quite happy with. I just couldn't think of any situation where this would be needed, and I just wondered if our monitoring officer had any, could help me actually think of where this situation could actually arise.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, it's for such situations as the COVID-19 emergency, but it would cover any other emergency where we would invoke our emergency plans and continuity plans, such as if the God forbid that the building should burn down, there were floods, and we've had the beast from the east a couple of years ago that caused some minor disruption. It's where that we were, and if this crisis had occurred earlier in the year, we would have been in some difficulties with setting the budgets and so on and so forth. So it has to be an emergency. It's not a matter of convenience. I would stress that to members, and will only be invoked following close conversations with the leaders, key members, officers, so on and so forth. So we do have the provisions already in the Constitution, but the extra paragraph set out in that report just set out some clarification of the steps that we will go through that haven't previously been included, that have been highlighted during the current emergency. Does that answer your question, Councillor Davies?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions? Councillor Daniel.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just wondering, what is the role of overview and scrutiny in constitutional change if we're having delegated powers now that the overview and scrutiny committee aren't functioning, and are changes going to be brought to members as they happen?
Should I take this, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, please.
The procedure rules that we adopted last week do indeed, for the moment, just make provision for expedient and necessary meetings. As we go through the following weeks, we will then begin to debate and discuss with members whether we need other meetings and if they're appropriate to be held at that time. The rules that you adopted last week don't exclude overview and scrutiny over the next 12 months, but it make it subject to a discussion with the head of paid service and the leader and other key members as to whether that meeting should take place. So it'll be on a case-by-case basis until we settle down and we get to a new normal.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cheadle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had a question on Appendix A, in particular the changes highlighted about the way in which planning applications will be determined whilst we're in this phase of the way we operate. And the question is really how, I understand what's said in the paper about the head of development management having authority and discussing planning applications with the relevant ward members. But my question actually was how the public understand what's going on. If you are living next door to or close to a site which has put in a planning application, normally there'll be a notice posted, and you would be able, as a member of the public, to respond. And I just wondered, in this new phase, whether we are giving the public the information that they require for planning applications as they process through the system.
I'm happy to answer that, Mr. Mayor. It's Steve Molyneux.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cheadle. Yes, the Head of Development Management, Mr. Weimer, has been reviewing how we will still engage the public, because, as you point out, if we put notices up on lampposts, but actually people are not leaving their house, then how do we engage with them? And I think the proposals that he's bringing forward are to actually start writing to identified neighbours in the vicinity. So as well as trying to publish the notice on a lamppost, we'll be actually bringing it to the attention of the members of the public near any planning application. So that's how we're planning to address that.
Thank you.
Councillor Cheadle. Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sellers.
Thank you. My query's been covered, thanks. It was just when people are self-isolating, how, you know, what uses are.
Okay. I've got you down twice, so is it the same question?
No, it was technical problems. Person in chair, not in computer.
No, that's fine. Thank you. Councillor Ewing.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just going to add, for reassurance to Councillor Daniel and to other members, that I have been liaising with the Deputy Chief Exec, who is the lead officer for ONS, as to ways forward and what work we will be completing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. Can I ask Councillor Edmonds to move the recommendation and get a seconder, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move the three recommendations on page 97. Have I got a seconder, please?
Happy to second those, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Moving to debate. Anybody wishing to debate? Councillor Hipsey.
Yes, I'd just like to raise a point based on Councillor Davis's paragraph 2.4.1, emergency powers, which seem to be particularly pertinent in our current situation. As I read that paragraph, I think it says that the head of paid service is basically the person who triggers emergency delegated powers and also takes up those powers. I was wondering what the Chamber thinks of that in terms of local democracy. It just seems a little... it's worth debating, I think.
Okay. Anybody else wish to actually debate it? No? Okay, thank you. We move to a vote on this one.
Mr. Mayor, sorry, I'm a bit slow off the mark. Would you like me to just to comment on that and see if I can add something to the debate?
Just saying.
I think in practice, as a council, we do tend to be open and engaging, I think, with members. There's certainly no intention for this to subvert the democratic process. It's a recognition that at points, I think our response might need to be quicker than the democratic process might allow. And I would certainly not want these powers to be used for anything other than that. we will be having weekly meetings with the chief exec and with the leader and deputy leader of the opposition groups, and there is a quite ranging discussion usually at those meetings, and we will also be continuing, as I said previously, with the weekly full council briefings. I would also hope if anything came up in the short term, we're all at home on our system quite a lot of the time at the moment, and people are quite easy to contact, and I think a discussion could take place if needed at fairly short notice with a number of important people. We'd certainly not want to use this for anything other than an action that is necessary and relevant.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hipsey.
I'd just like to thank the leader for that. I just thought it was worth highlighting that so that members are aware that there's a lot of onus here on the head of paid services. As the leader says, I'm sure that wouldn't pose any problems as long as we're all aware that that is the case. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Sellers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I actually would like to comment about the regular meetings which Tavistock can be parochial. Tavistock elected members are having 3 times a week with officers, and how transparent and active my workload is now compared with many years experience. And I think need to take comfort in the fact that we have adjusted to the lockdown, and that the democratic process is still being adhered to. I, for one, would be most concerned if the council were not transparent and openly honest and anything like that. And I can understand a little bit what Councillor Hipsey is alluding to, and you're right to highlight it if that's how you think. There is an element of trust here that we do need. Decisions are having to be made quite swiftly due to the nature of the coronavirus and what it's throwing at us. However, if we do have any issues, I'm reassured by what the leader has just said, and so I support you there, leader, and I just take comfort in the fact how well we are working, how we've adjusted. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Molyneux, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, just to reiterate what the leader said earlier, and just to bring up from the previous comments that the leader made about the fact that we were in a scenario where we were having daily meetings. So myself and the rest of the senior leadership team have been on numerous calls in terms of across Devon, across local government with MHCLG. And the purpose for having those daily calls was so that we could discuss the outcomes of those meetings with the leaders. The fact that we're now moving to what we're classing as the new normal, I do expect us to be sort of getting back to a business as usual type footing. And certainly that's the reason for moving back to a weekly meeting with the leader and the leader of the opposition, so that we can actually start moving back from the position that we found ourselves in. Subject that is, of course, to any changes that the government might bring in as a result of the response to the crisis. But really to reassure Councillor Hipsey and the rest of the councillors that it absolutely is transparent, and it would be absolute extreme last resort where I would make a decision without even talking to the leader. I wouldn't dream of it. So that was all I would say. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Yelland.
I was just simply going to say that, again, looking at the actual item itself, this literally just applies to emergency situations, so it wouldn't apply to routine, whatever that might mean these days. Routine issues would still continue to come through the normal routes, I am assuming, and hope somebody can confirm that. It would only be applicable for the actual emergency.
Thank you. Councillor Bridges.
Right, great. Just at the bottom. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I just confirm as well, I think endorsing what Councillor Yelland has said, and maybe a bit of reassurance to Councillor Hipsey, these are nationwide. This is an act, an emergency powers that refers to all councils. It's nothing specific to us, I assume, if that could just be confirmed. And maybe a question for the Borough Solicitor to rack her brains. When was the last time emergency powers like this were invoked?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, well, indeed, very good question. We wrote the Constitution 20 years ago now, and this is the first time we've ever invoked them, and we've only made one decision, considering the extent of this emergency they were in under these particular powers. I mean, we have got emergency powers already in the Constitution. These are just setting out the steps that we would take, just to clarify. And I would just like to reassure members that we would only use these in extremis. So it's where it is a genuine emergency. A decision just has to be made. If a decision can wait, then it will. As indeed these decisions that you're discussing today have waited until we've had the powers and the regulations in order to have remote meetings, which I hope reassures members.
Okay, thank you very much. There's no more debate. I'll take this to the vote. Mr. White, I think we should actually have a verbal vote on this one by the debate, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. So again, members, as per last week, in alphabetical order. Since the start of the meeting, members, I've had apologies from Councillor Ball, so we'll go straight to Councillor Bolton, please.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Bridgewater? 4. Thank you. Councillor Cheadle?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Crozier?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Daniel?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Davies?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Edmonds?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Ewings?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Hayworth?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Hipsey?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Drury?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Kemp?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Kimber?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Leach?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Moody?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Mott?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Moyes?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Musgrave?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Pearce?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Ratcliffe?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Renders?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Ridges?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Samuel?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Sellis?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Southcott?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Spettigue?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Vachon?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Wood?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Yelland?
4.
Thank you very much. That then, members, is 29 and unanimous in favour of the recommendation. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Mr. White. That was worth it just to hear everyone's dulcet tones. Thank you. Move on to item 9, grants hold an external audit plan. Mrs. Buckle to introduce, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this external audit plan would normally be considered by the Audit Committee, and we've put it on today's full council meeting. So it's the external audit plan for the financial year ending 31st of March 2020. So it's looking at the 1920 statement of financial accounts. In terms of the headlines from this report, what Grant Thornton are going to be looking at are various things. So they're going to look at, for example, around our fixed asset valuations at 31st of March 2020 and any impact there around COVID-19. They're going to be looking at things like our pension fund liabilities and again valuation assessments. With regards to IFRS 16, which is all around how we account for leases into the council, that has been deferred. So that was due to be brought into being on 1st of April 2020. SITFA and the Accounting Board have actually deferred the introduction of that for another year. So that is very welcomed. Around COVID-19, they will look at any material uncertainties, any significant risks as part of the audit of this year's accounts. A standard thing, they will also look at the allocation of shared services costs, and we have an item on this year's on the agenda around that shared services methodology. So that's around, we have a single workforce between ourselves and South Hams District Council, and it's how the costs of that workforce are split between ourselves and South Hams. Materiality, the auditors have set that at £500,000, and right at the end of the audit plan, you will see we have a new key audit partner. That is somebody called Jackson Murray. So Jackson, members of the audit committee will be aware we did have Geraldine Daly. Jackson is our new audit partner, and it has taken over for the 1920 accounts. We've had Grant Thornton on site, so they've been doing their interim audit through parts of February and parts of March. And right at the end of their report, they are giving us a heads up really that the proposed audit fee will slightly increase by £1,700. So last year it was 34,835. The proposed fee for 1920 is 36,535. And whilst that is a slight increase of £1,700, I think the outcome we all want is a good quality external audit of our accounts and our financial position. So there is a slight increase being proposed there by Grant Thornton. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Questions? Councillor Davies.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think we all appreciate we've always had a very good audit report from our previous auditors. The question I've got really, I would have preferred to ask to Steve Johnson or Jackson Murray, but in their special risks, they've obviously highlighted things like the apportionment of costs between ourselves and the South Hams, which is an ongoing concern, obviously, for the auditors, but I'm happy with that. Pension fund valuation, and obviously we've recently had the actuarial evaluation, which is very fortunate for us. But they do highlight a risk of our controls, and obviously we're having controls in place for a reason. But it highlights that there's a management override. There's a risk with management override of controls, particularly in journals. I just wondered if our Section 151 officer could explain that one.
Yes, certainly, through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you. Yes, that management override of controls, you will see that within every council's external audit plan. So that is not something that has been highlighted specifically as a concern for West Devon. That management override of controls will be in every audit plan that we've had for the past number of years. And what that's saying is that there is a presumed risk in any council that there is a risk of management override of those controls, and that's something, that risk is present in all entities. What they are saying there on page 5, page 131 of the agenda, is they will look at all of the journals which we have processed. So they actually do ask for a complete download of every single journal that's gone through the ledger, and they have a computer generated program which will pick out what they feel are unusually high journals, or journals that may have been processed at a time of the day which is throwing up something within their programming. So, for example, if a journal was put through on a Sunday, they may look at that journal more than a journal that was processed on a Monday, for example. They will analyse all of those journals, pick up a sample and do sample testing around there. And they will also look at any unusually high journals and go through those. And they will look at our controls. So our controls are that any journals over £25,000 are reviewed by Pauline Tenstock, who is our head of finance practice, or our level 4 accountants, so people like Alex Walker. Those are all reviewed. That's our procedure. As long with other district councils, we don't have the resources to have every journal input by one officer and then authorised by a second officer. Only the ones over 25,000 are reviewed on a secondary basis. But that's what they are highlighting there. And I think in every report that they've written since for the past few years, they've said that on looking at those management overrider controls, they're very happy that it's extremely low risk, and they have no concerns over any of the journals that have ever been posted. But it's just something that they put in everyone's audit plan to say that obviously that there is always a risk. You can never totally eliminate risk, but they're happy with the procedures that we have in place for journal authorisation. And they do select any high risk, unusual journals, and they review those as part of their work as Grant Thornton.
Thank you very much. Any more from you, Councillor Davies?
I'm fine, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Fine, thank you. So there's no more questions. Mr. White, I'm assuming we should probably get a recommendation and proposer and seconder from members.
That would be my recommendation, Mr. Mayor, to give it the opportunity to be debated.
Yeah. So could I ask Councillor Edmonds to possibly recommend this?
Yes, certainly, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, thank you. I'm happy to move the recommendation that the Council notes the contents of the Grant Thornton external audit plan. And can I have a seconder, please?
I'm happy to second, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. So we move into debate. Any debate? Nothing coming up on my screen.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sorry. Councillor Edmonds.
Well, may I just mention perhaps at this point that I'd really like to thank Mrs. Buckle and the whole finance team led by Mrs. Henstorp for maintaining the Council's finances in such good order. And certainly the huge amount of work that they undertake, particularly now the closing down, the year end, and of course, whilst they're undertaking the processing of all the small business grant applications. It's been a huge task, but so well executed. So really a huge thank you to all the effort and diligence of Mrs. Buckle and the whole of the finance team.
Thank you very much for that. I think we can all echo that.
Thank you very much.
Vote. Are we happy that we do this by exception? So if there's anybody who is against this particular report, if you can state so in the comment column.
We need a seconder, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry, I thought we did. Do you beg your pardon?
Mr. Mayor, I'm happy to second that. It's Councillor Jory.
Yes, thank you very much. So back to where we started. Oh, that's what I thought. Councillor Davies did second. Mr. White, you can get the two councillors to fight between themselves.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And obviously, this was a noting report, and in the absence of any dissenting voices down the left-hand side, we'll take that vote as unanimous. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thanks very much indeed. So we move on to item 10, shared service methodology for 2019-20. Councillor Edmonds to introduce, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Council is legally required to maintain adequate governance and financial arrangements to ensure a fair allocation of shared costs between West Devon and South Hams councils. This report sets out the methodology for the apportionment of costs between the two councils. Members will note that Section 3 of the report highlights two significant changes: planning applications and HR. The changes are likely to reduce West Devon staffing costs by £30,000 to £40,000 for 2019-20. The staffing costs of a particular service team are split on a defined basis as set out in the report. The split of costs reflects the level of caseload which is attributable to each council's individual service. The same method of apportionment of cost has been used for a number of years, and our auditors have always given us a clean audit report. The report recommendation is that the Council notes the methodology of the shared service appointment of cost between West Devon Borough Council and Southampton District Council for 2019-20 as attached in Appendix A. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. We have questions. Councillor Cheadle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've got a quick question on paragraph 3. The planning applications change of load I can completely sort of understand, in that presumably it's a function of literally the number of planning applications that each council processes. But the human resources one, given that all our staff, as far as I'm aware, all our staff are shared between the two councils, why is it that our human resources load in West Devon has increased and that in South Hams hasn't? Is it to do with the transfer of the refuse staff in South Hams? I wonder.
I can answer that question, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Yes, that's correct, Councillor Cheadle. It is due to the outsourcing of the waste contract within South Hams, which took place from 1st of April 2019. So in terms of the proportion has moved from a 79-21 split to a 74 and 26% split. And that is because of the outsourcing of staff which previously would have been employees of Southampton District Council.
Thank you. Fully understood.
Thank you very much. Any more questions? Okay, thank you. Can I ask Councillor Edmonds to make the recommendation, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move the recommendation on page 147, and have I got a seconder, please?
Happy to second that, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you very much. So if everybody's happy, well, this is for noting, but if we do this by exception, so if anybody against this report, if you could state so now. If not, then notice Mr. White.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Once again, in the absence of any dissenting voices, we will take that as a unanimous vote. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Item 11, Budget Book 2020-2021, Councillor Edmonds. Again, to introduce the report, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Council is legally required to set a balanced budget each financial year. This report presents to members the budget agreed by Council in February of this year and sets out the income and expenditure budgeted for each of the 4 service areas. Members will be aware that the current COVID crisis will adversely affect the budget in front of you today. Car parking and planning income are just 2 examples of how income is likely to be significantly reduced as a result of the emergency. As you probably know, we are lobbying our MPs for additional support from government to compensate the Council for its loss of income. Any variances in budgeted income and expenditure will be reported to members as part of the ongoing budget monitoring process. Where necessary, management action plans will be provided, giving details of proposed actions to address any shortfalls. The report recommendation requires Council to note the content of the budget book for 2021. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Any questions on this, please? No? Thank you. Could you now move the recommendations, please, Councillor Evans?
Yes, certainly, Mr. Mayor. I move the recommendation on page 157 of the report. And have I got a seconder, please?
Happy to second that, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. We move into debate. Any debate on this, please? Councillor Cheadle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to say that before this budget book gets washed away by the COVID virus, I'd just like to record a huge vote of thanks to the finance team and members. A huge amount of work has gone into getting us to a position where we can present a balanced budget. A huge number of very difficult decisions have been made, and I think we've shown a remarkable degree of common sense and fortitude in getting ourselves to this position. Few will know that, and of course COVID will change the ground on which we stand significantly, and so I'd just like to put it on record really that had it not been for the virus, we would have been in the fortunate position of being able to present a balanced budget.
Thank you very much. Mr. White, as this is financial, should this be a verbal vote?
All this is doing, Mayor, with your approval, is actually noting the content of the book. So in essence, there's no decision to be made. So if members again are happy to vote by exception, I'd suggest that would be a good way forward.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'll ask members if you're happy to go by exception. So is there anybody against this? If you can please make that comment. I see I have Councillor Sellis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, just a comment that lo and behold, central government has actually recognised the importance of local government. And I note the comment that we're lobbying our MPs. I think it is remarkable actually that the public were actually ahead of the game in some areas quicker than the councils themselves, and just hope that when this all sorts out that they will recognise how important how important councils are, local councils. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. White.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You've got an additional comment from Councillor Pearce.
Oh, Mr. One. Thank you, Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was a bit slow off the mark there. Sorry about that.
Okay.
What is worrying, I'm picking up on the comments from Councillor Salis. What is worrying for me is when the Communities Minister states that it's expected that local authorities will share the burden of the financial situation with central government. I just, it's quite worrying when you get a senior minister saying that. I don't think he's aware of just what this is costing the district and county councils, the COVID-19.
I probably better not comment, but thank you very much for that. So, Mr. White, we don't have any other comments.
Mr. Mayor, we have a comment from Councillor Jury.
Councillor Jury.
I just want to come back to that very pertinent comment from Councillor Pearce. You're absolutely right. if it's any reassurance, for the past month, I've been in various meetings almost daily. Many of those meetings there have been government ministers or senior civil servants, and those individuals have been impressed on every occasion about both the contribution that local government has made and their lack of understanding of local government and how its finances work. And they keep telling us they've understood that. The latest tranche of 1.6 billion that is being released, we have been told by a minister that there will be a significantly larger portion of that coming to district councils. The definition of significant remains to be seen, but we're awaiting the apportionment and we'll report back in due course.
Thank you very much. I'll try and keep my eye on the screen in case anybody else wants to make a comment. Right, thank you. Mr. White.
Thank you, Mr. I'm conscious that my PowerPoint seems to be playing up as well for transparency purposes. So I just repeat the recommendation which has been proposed and seconded, which is that Council notes the content of the budget book for 2020-2021. So it's a noting exercise, but I'm just conscious that a lot of members can't see that on their screens. Thank you.
That's it. Thank you very much. Item 12. 2020-21 Internal Audit Plan. Councillor Edmonds, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I believe Mr. Measures.
Yes, I'm on the line.
Has joined us, and Mr. Mayor, I think Mr. Measures is going to kindly introduce this item.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Edmonds. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, this is the internal audit plan for 2021 that would have gone to the March Audit Committee. As part of the public sector internal audit standards and also as part of the audit charter and strategy, I'm required to present an audit plan for the forthcoming year, which outlines the work that internal audit will be carrying out during the year. Just to point out that the plan was put together during January and February and the report produced at the beginning of March. Obviously, since then, the world has changed. So what I'm just going to do is explain how the plan was put together in the first place, which is, if you look at section 3.1 at the top of page 177 of the papers. Basically, the plan is put together by I start to look at the risk register to identify areas of council as identified as high risk. I also update a thing called the Audit Universe, which is a document that I maintain where I try to assess where your areas of high risk might exist. I then discuss the plan, my proposed plan, and seek ideas and comment from members of SLT. I also look at previous internal audit reviews that have taken place, and also I look at the experience and knowledge that both I have, my auditors have, and the rest of Devon Audit Partnership have. So that may be experience locally across the rest of DAP's clients in the Southwest and also nationally. I just want to point out that our plan is maintained at 430 days, the same as last year. And it is the actual areas to be covered are outlined in Appendix A. Now, with regard to the COVID-19 situation, obviously our work has changed slightly, and the plan is flexible. What we are trying to do at the present time is complete our work from last year's plan. My two auditors have also been helping out, doing verification on the small business grant payments, doing various checks on applications, which means they haven't been able to really carry on doing any internal audit work as such. Once that's complete, I'm hoping that they can get back on doing areas of finishing off last year's plan and starting this year's plan.
One thing as Devon Audit Partnership is obviously looking at across all its clients is a different way of working whilst we're in this current situation, because the last thing we want to do is to interfere with the good work that officers are doing in response to COVID-19. So I'll be discussing with members of SLT and others a potential new model that will bring in, look to give a necessary assurance to both officers and yourselves as members as to the various risk and control framework. So that's all I really need to say at this present time. Obviously, we'll try and undertake audit work as best we can, and we expect our plans to suffer some reduction. And whilst we'd like to make up any lost time, that this might not be achievable, although we hope by this time next year to be able to provide a balanced audit opinion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much for that. Any questions, please? Councillor Davies.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's only just crossed my mind, really. I mean, with Dominic Measures being present from the Devon Audit Partnership, on the basis we're not having audit committee meetings at the moment, if we are going to continue, should Grant Thornton not be involved in presenting their own reports, etc.? I just wondered that one.
Mr. Mayor, I could probably answer that question. Yes, Grant Thornton have given their apologies for today, and apologies, they do normally attend all of our audit committee meetings. If we have any items on the agenda in future, I'm sure Grant Thornton will be in attendance.
Thank you. Anything else, Councillor Davies?
That's everything from me, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah, okay. If I can ask Councillor Edmonds now to move the recommendation proposed and get it seconded, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. The recommendations are on page 175 of your agenda papers, and I'm happy to move those. It's recommended that the report be approved and the proposed internal audit plan for 2020-21 at Appendix A be approved. Thank you. Have I got a seconder, please?
Happy to second that, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I assume both together on block, Councillor Edmonds?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, happy with that.
Okay, thank you. Debate. Any debate, please? No debate. Mr. White, I think we need to take this through to a full vote, please.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, members, in alphabetical order, Councillor Bolton?
4.
Thank you, Councillor Bridgewater? 4. Councillor Cheadle?
4.
Thank you, Councillor Crozier?
4.
Thank you, Councillor Daniel?
4.
Thank you, Councillor Davies?
4.
Thank you, Councillor Edmonds?
4.
Thank you, Councillor Ewings? 4. Thank you, Councillor Hayworth?
4.
Thank you, Councillor Hipsey?
4.
Thank you, Councillor Jory?
4.
Thank you, Councillor Kemp?
4.
Thank you, Councillor Kimber?
4.
Thank you, Councillor Leach?
4.
Thank you, Councillor Moody? 4. Thank you, Councillor Mott?
4.
Thank you, Councillor Moyes?
4.
Thank you, Councillor Musgrave? Councillor Musgrave? Okay, I'll check again later on. Councillor Pearce?
4.
Thank you, Councillor Ratcliffe?
4.
Thank you, Councillor Renders?
Yes, 4.
Thank you, Councillor Ridges?
4.
Thank you, Councillor Samuel?
4.
Thank you, Councillor Sellis?
4.
Thank you, Councillor Southcott?
4.
Thank you, Councillor Spettigue?
4.
Thank you, Councillor Vashon?
4.
Thank you, Councillor Wood?
4.
Thank you. And Councillor Yelland.
4.
And just for the record, just a final check for Councillor Musgrave. No. Okay. Thank you, members. That is therefore 28 and unanimous in favour of the recommendation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Before we move into item 13, which will be part 2, can we make sure that the live feed has been switched off, and can I have confirmation that it has been, please? Okay, thank you.